Good morning. Let's go ahead and get started, everybody. Emily, if you can go ahead and start with the audience participation tips.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Emily. I'm an evaluation specialist here at USET. We are building a community. So if you could please take a moment and introduce yourself in the chat. We'd like to know everyone's name, tribal affiliation, organization, job title. If you're on, if you know what ancestral lands you're on, please share that too. That'd be wonderful. Everyone will be muted until the participant reflection portion towards the end of the hour. And during this segment, you can use your raise my hand icon and someone will call on you, or you can also ask questions in the chat. And towards the end of the hour, after this, you'll receive a link to the recording and presentation by the end of the week. Next slide. Okay, as far as disclosures, this activity is jointly provided by USET and Cardia Services. Cardia is an approved provider of nursing continuing professional development by the Montana Nurses Association and accredited approval with distinction by American Nurses Credentialing Centers Commission on Accreditation. And we are offering medical, nursing, social work, and counseling continuing education credits today. In order to get those, you need to stay the hour and then also complete our evaluation and CEU request, which I will be sharing in the chat. It'll also be shared as a follow-up communication if you happen to miss that. And you can, even if you don't want continuing education credits, we would love your feedback. And so please also follow that link to give us some evaluation. And if you have any questions about this activity as far as continuing education, please contact Paige O'Sullivan. Her information is here, or you can contact one of the USET staff and we will forward your questions on. And lastly, we have no relevant financial relationships with ineligible companies for those involved with the ability to control the content of this activity. So we don't have anything to disclose today. And that is all.
Mitakue Oyase. Welcome, all my relations. On behalf of USET, we welcome you to this month's presentation. Next slide. So to learn and acknowledge what tribal nation land you and your organization are standing on, you can go ahead and go to this link, https://nativeland.ca, or you can text your zip code or city to this number, 907-312-5085. And we are connecting, we are reconnecting our Indigenous community. So thanks for being a part of our Reclaiming Our Collective Stories. So this is just a collection of where everybody is located across the United States and Alaska and some in Canada. Next slide. So I want to introduce Holly Echo Hawk. She will be taking it from here. So good morning, Holly.
Good morning, Bernice. Good morning, everybody. I'm so happy to see everybody. I love seeing your introductions coming through in the chat, and it's just really, it makes for a proud day to see where everyone's from and all the different tribes. We've really enjoyed this series, and we hope that you continue to join us. As you know, our series is called Reclaiming Native Psychological Brilliance. And we are intentional about the term reclaiming because we know that Native people are brilliant, and it's in our DNA, it's in our ancestry. And this series is all about putting that brilliance up front. And just a reminder, January, we launched this monthly series in January with an overall introduction to reclaiming and why we developed it. February, we focused on Native youth, and we had the indigenous students and from the Cobell Scholarship in Albuquerque. Last month, we had a great presentation by Jeff King, a Muskogee tribal psychologist who talked about the Western worldview impact on Indigenous behavioral health, and actually almost the opposite. He talked about how Indigenous people and Native people influence some of the founders of modern psychology. So that was a fascinating presentation. We had over 200 people review that PowerPoint of March after the presentation, and hundreds of people were on the call. I hope some of you were on. Today, we have a special treat. Today, we're moving on to Native help declining and help seeking. And it's a really important topic. You know, all of our programs seek funding to provide services to our community. But sometimes we're so busy, we don't have time to kind of peel back the layers and think about what is it that helps people that need support seek help. What's the barriers that make them not want to seek help or decline help? So today we have two fabulous friends of mine and colleagues, Art Martinez, and they're going to introduce themselves, and Mike Duncan. Art and I have known each other for a very long time, and I was thinking this morning, Art, this is how far back Art and I go. Back then, when Art and I were in a car on the backside of the Sierras going up to Bishop, California, that's when, if you had a satellite TV, you had that great big white dish outside of your trailer or your home. So that dates us, Art. And Mike Duncan, Mike's one of my most favorite people. We have a great mutual friend, the late Janet King in San Francisco Bay Area, and Mike is going to talk about his work and his organization. So I will turn it over to them.
Cool. My name is Art Martinez. I'm a clinical psychologist and of the Chumash tribe. Currently, we live in Stewart or Carson City, Nevada. But I was mentioning earlier on the basically near the campus of the Stewart Indian School, or the now closed Stewart Indian School, and I'm just glad to be here. And I'll let Mike say a few words about himself.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Duncan. I'm an enrolled member of the Round Valley Indian Tribes. I'm Maidu, Wailaki, Wintun on my father's side, and on Western Branch, Shoshone, Tomok on my mother's side. And I'm the executive director of Native Dads Network here in Sacramento, California. And we've been doing a lot of good work working with men in the community here and outside areas, bringing the message of a healthy man, fatherhood, and sobriety, Red Road, all those good things that our people are using to heal. So thank you for having me.
I think we're just going to go ahead and continue on, Mike, and let you go ahead and say whatever you want to say about your organization and your other slides.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, we Native Dads Network, man, we're a grassroots organization. I mean, man, we were founded. I had the vision of Native Dads Network in 2012 when it came to me, and we started working on not trying to be a nonprofit. We became an official nonprofit in 2014, and there the work begun as far as creating fatherhood groups, starting healthy relationship groups, and we started, using we really started using like implementing culture more into our programming as later on through the years of really understanding like my own journey of recovery and healing, and using that that blueprint and just making it more accessible to men in our community here in Sacramento, California. We've grown since then. We landed some grants in the last few years, which has been great. It's taken a lot of work. I mean, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of trying to get to this other place of being trying to provide the best services to our community. But we've always this has always been my passion. Like I've been working with men, and I say that with the grant part because prior to that we didn't have really much money, and I did a lot of work for free because it was something that was not only healing to our community, was healing to me. And so we've, like I said, recently in the past year or so, we've been on a wellness tour, and you can probably go to the next slide. And the wellness tour is really based it's an opioid education, Narcan training. What we've done and we brought it to rural communities that a lot of communities that didn't have the resources of Narcan, or even a lot of connection to the clinic. They won't go to the clinic. So we've taken I call it the tour. We took in our group out and provided opioid education. We did Narcan trainings, a Narcan skit, like, acting out how to administer Narcan. And then we also did testimonials, myself included. I lost my relative about 1.5 years ago to fentanyl overdose. The family that we bring with us, they've lost a family member, a nephew that through fentanyl. It was attacking our communities really hard here in California, and we just decided we need to go out and help the best way we can, especially in the pandemic. And so all of our groups were held were outside, social distancing. We gave out masks and different things, but we found it very successful. Now we're getting invited to multiple communities to come and share our words and our education and our culture. And something we did towards the end, we started the last couple, and we started bringing our feathers, and we started dancing for the communities that we attend. So it's been, we've learned so much in the last year about how this fentanyl is impacting our communities. And we have a long way to go. We have a lot of work still to do. So that is one of our big goals of our work that right now that we're currently doing, along working with fathers and mothers in our communities of sobriety. So maybe go to the next picture. There's art. Perfect. All right.
As I said before, I introduced myself before. I've been able to assist. Been fortunate enough to assist many communities and to consult with government projects to develop services within our communities. The Native Dads Network, I'm very involved with, very supportive of. The thing that I think makes the Native Dads Network approach, and along with allied agencies and allied groups that we work with, is the fact that we don't look to bring a message necessarily to a community. We look to initiate healing within a community. And so the community asking us to come in and to offer the blessings, not only of the gathering, but the very strong medicines of the dances that are brought out, really truly taps into something within the lifeblood of that community. And people come because they feel a need to. So they want to join that type of recovery. And I personally come to this work not only as a melding of different experiences, over 40 years of recovery, my cultural experiences. I've been fortunate to be involved with our ceremonies for well over those 40 years, and bring a little education to the process. And as a practicing clinician, I'm able to offer support for those who need that type of support, or maybe just need to digest what it is that they've come to the sessions about. So we can go to the next slide. There you go. I'm also the director of the Center for Native Child and Family Resilience, which is a Children's Bureau project to investigate and demonstrate cultural culturally founded interventions in the prevention and in addressing child abuse, decreasing chances of maltreatment within our communities using cultural means. So that's kind of a fancy way of saying we seek Native solutions to Native issues. And so one of the things that we are doing is we have 5 different projects throughout the country, and we have demonstrated that we cannot, it's very hard to, let's put it this way, it's very hard to demonstrate the success of a program in the sense of rising to an area of evidence base without actually evaluating the program from within the culture. So we very much use indigenous ways of knowing as a model for evaluating not only the effectiveness of programs, but we've been able to demonstrate how effective and how rich these programs are when we look at the very Native and cultural interventions that are being used through Native and cultural eyes. So I'll leave it at that for now. And this is I would just leave this for you to read at another time, but a lot of thought and prayer went into our logo for the Center for Native Child and Family Resilience. And one of our very talented artists who grew up in the community I grew up in came to me and he said, I have a vision for your work and I want to draw it. I said, you've got it. Let's do this. And so this brief write-up will show you the depth in which we were connecting with the important work before us from the very beginning. And Holly, did you want to walk us through this, or?
Yes, I will. And thanks for talking about your logo. And the reason it's beautiful, number one, but I think it really is and the explanation that people can read later about it. It's just another example of everything that Native people do has a meaning, and every item on that logo has a meaning, and that tells a story about it you all could read later. So here's what we're going to talk about today with Art and Mike. Really just conversation, series of questions, not really a presentation, it's just a conversation. So we want to talk about what was the old time way? What was the tribal traditional approach to seeking help? And why do from your perspectives, why do some Native people delay or decline help for assistance with drugs or alcohol? What motivates Native people to seek help? And when they do seek help, who do they turn to? I'm always saying, I've worked in mental health for a really long time, and I'm always saying when Native people are in a crisis, the first place they go is never to the mental health clinic. That's not where they go. So we want to talk about what motivates Native people to seek help and who do they turn to? And then, of course, the last question is what helps a Native person stay on the path of treatment and recovery? So the discussion today is very intentionally Native male focused. So we're lucky to have Art and Mike. But later on, I'm going to give a real short female perspective, Native female perspective of some of the same questions. So if we can go on to the next slide. I think Mike was going to talk about this.
Native culture and help seeking. Traditional way of being was to seek help when was needed. how did or does traditional helping seeking help happen now? One of the things, like I said, we were just going to have a conversation. It was nothing, like designed and drawn out. And I could just tell you, I could share with you part of what, I guess a little bit of my story, how this kind of relates to me. And I always use myself in a sense because, this is my approach when I work with Native men in our communities. Our organization and I always, I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll keep my answers brief and short because I know there's a lot to cover. But I know that, in my own, like recovery and my own healing, my own going through this journey that I've been on of being, reconnecting with my own children, and in that journey kind of pushed in recovery by the courts, to that or jail, type of thing, or losing my kids and through to the system. I recognized that there was not a lot of programming that was out there for Native men. And so the Native men, were kind of some disregarded, especially when we make a mistake in our communities. And so we're kind of like shamed in the sense of not being worthy, maybe the problem, or looked down upon. And there's a lot of guilt. Sometimes we're fragile. And a lot of times we're fragile in the sense of like being raised, being young and not really being encouraged or having that male role model in our lives. Those, no one's showing us how to like pick ourselves up and dust ourselves off and start again. We're kind of a lot of times we just wing it. And so having programming, and so a lot of times men and a lot of communities don't look for help because they don't feel like anybody really truly understands the situation that are in, that their problems are really like unique in a sense. And we know in recovery, that after we've been in recovery for a while, that our story and what we're sharing is not very unique at all. There's a bunch of people that have gone through similar things, or even worse, and they've turned their lives around. And so, one of the things that we open up to, as far as our group here is, again, to maybe, that's why I share my story, because it makes people identify with, again, with maybe just sharing a little bit about addiction, my own addiction, my own family, trauma, or pain, and then be able to say that this is how I work through it. Now, traditionally, long time ago, like when we look at, I don't think, obviously mental health is nothing new to our people. But I think one of the things that I know that, like I said, traditionally and so there's always these things that people say, and when they're like, we could use different words: healing, forgiveness, self-forgiveness, self-worth, but there were songs and ceremonies put in place. There are things put in place and to help our people with the mental stability. Like life is life. There's trauma is trauma. Our people had it hard then. They have it hard now. We're always going through something. The very difference is that there's the things were taken from us at a certain point as far as our healing, there was a ban illegal. It was, religion came in. And so things were taken from us and left us with nothing, And so what we're relearning and we're reconnecting with those things and be able to utilize it in our practices. And so some people, they will say the integration of the culture into the clinical practice. And part of that is, but, there's only a certain amount of people that are really able to do that. But I think that's the key to our people identifying with treatment, and having reason to do it is because of our future generations, really understanding what are we passing forward. And it's something that is very traditional. I always tell the men in our groups is healing is very traditional. Our people knew how and understood the importance of healing to teach our children, our young ones, and our families, going forward. That's why we still have those things today. And so it makes it very powerful when we look at the bigger picture, connecting the old with today and going forward. Art, you have anything to share?
Yeah. Sure. These the points you're making are very important points. It's important to understand that, traditionally, let's say before contact, we had our ceremonies, we had our ways, and the way that people would approach help would be that if something traumatic happened to someone, the community would gather around them and they would care for them and they would tell them, this is what we need to do for you. And they would direct them. You're going to need to talk to this person, and they would give them an offering and so forth to establish that relationship between their families. And all of that was designed for a very important reason, and that is that if you had a traumatic event in your life, it prevented it from becoming a wound to your soul. And maybe that's what trauma can be defined as at times, as a soul wound, right, or spiritual wound. And so those things were addressed right away. Much in the same way, when someone has problems of any nature, really, it's the community and the family that tend to come together and say, okay, this has become a problem for us. Because it's a problem for you, it's a problem for us. Because we share our lives together. When someone is using drugs, it affects each and every one of us in the community. If someone is abusing their children, it affects each and every one of us. And so what happens is that the way of seeking help becomes more or less a way of the community coming together, or maybe the family coming together and saying to the person, there's some things here you have to correct, or there's some things here that need to change. And so we're going to, we're going to pressure you in many ways to find that help. And we're going to help you to seek that ceremony or relationship that is going to bring that help to you. And so when people come to a Western model of care, it's more times than not, they will say, I'm not quite sure why I'm here, but other people told me to come here. And so most therapists, most Western trained therapists, or many Western trained therapists, will say, well, you don't have to be here. If you're not coming for you, then, it's probably not the best place to come to when you're coming for you. But what they're really doing, the person is really doing, is they're saying to them, I've become a problem for my family and community. And so they have referred me to come and talk to you and to seek help for that problem. And that is a very legitimate way of them walking through the door. And we want to change that conversation eventually into them realizing their own need for change, and them, the person taking responsibility, obviously, for their own change. But it is that guidance that they've been given that they're oftentimes respecting by walking through the door. Yeah. So, it's the old thing of I often tell people, you were told you had to get help by your grandma, by your auntie, by a number of folks in the community, and that's great, but you get to vote too. And so, what do you think? Do you think you need help? And oftentimes they'll say, yes, of course, I think I need help. Yeah. So that's an important part to understand, that if someone comes in the door and says that I'm here because my mom is pressuring me, or my wife is pressuring me to be here, or the social services made me come here, that may be a face-saving mechanism as well as a safety mechanism. So without going into it in too much detail, traditionally, the person would be guided to the assistance that they needed. And in the modern day, people are recognizing that they've been guided to that assistance, and they're taking heed of it. And then fairly quickly, they will admit that, yes, this is a real problem that I recognize, and it is my problem. So that's the way we develop a relationship with people, is that we're recognizing not only their needs, but the fact that they have been referred by others.
Right. Can we talk a little bit more about trauma, Art, and go to the next slide, Brian?
Sure. So trauma is very affects people at many levels. We have a picture here of Chilocco Indian School, and Holly was mentioning her experiences with the school, but in many ways, for many of our families, it was Indian schools are an initial source of trauma, at least generationally back. I mean, not in the modern time, but it's important to understand that there are waves of trauma that have hit our people. Everything from, genocidal extermination, removal of our children, abuse and murder of our people being missing. Those issues exist today. They haven't really gone anywhere. They've morphed and they changed over time. So when we work with trauma, it's important to understand that many of these issues that people are referred for or that come to care about are based upon a shame or a lack of feeling safety. So if they're referred, let's say, by their social worker or the court or any number of other folks, they may act very trauma responsive. And trauma responsive might be a fancy way of saying they may act like they don't want to be there. And so they come in the door with this issue at times. And as we've seen, you kind of roll with it. You kind of roll with the resistance that's there, as the motivational interviewing might tell you. But it's important you don't have to look hard to see that the trauma issues are the issues that they're living in their life, that they're reflecting the trauma of generations that they carry. And so what tends to happen is that we tend to have, we then respond to that trauma. So when someone's not acting nice toward us, we tend to not act nice back, or want to make limits and boundaries with them without realizing that they're really acting out of a sense of not feeling safe. And so, I tend to be very patient with people. I've learned so much from our elders. I just jump into a role of handle this like your grandma would. And so this is what, so I say, well, have a seat, have some coffee or have some water. And if someone says something like, well, I didn't want to come here today, I say, well, that's wonderful. Because that's what my grandma would say. And so we begin to look at things. If we could go back to the previous slide, thank you. Just before we leave the slide, though, it's important to understand that response, that attitude that we develop, or that we're at risk for developing, for a bit of being oppositional, let's just say, to these two folks that come in seeking help, is really a burden of the system. And so we tend to identify with the aggressor. We have the job. We're very aware of our power and the power relationship. And so is the client. And so the only thing that they understand, and many people understand about that power relationship, is that it's a risk to them. They feel like they'll be harmed. And so how many institutions do you realize that actually work off of that power imbalance? You know, the criminal justice system, obviously, schools, churches, hospitals. But tribal agencies aren't really exempt from that either. You know, we have a job, I'm all dressed up. I tell people I have my good teeth in, you know, and we tend to say, you know, I'm a professional here and you, by the way, are not. And that's really not what's needed. So now you can click next slide. Sorry about that. So it's very important to understand that trauma can alter the life of a family. It can alter the life of an individual, and it's going to be passed on in generationally. So it creates a belief that the family is never safe. And so the person grows up in an environment feeling like they're never safe. And treatment then becomes a very risky thing for them. And so the first thing that we have to establish is safety, when for most Western trained folks, that's assumed. It's assumed that it's a safe place. We're a part of your community. You come here seeking help, it must be safe. Well, that's a misdirected assumption. So I'm going to ask Mike if you have some comments about this, because I'm sure we've all seen this in action.
Yeah, definitely. I one of the things when you're talking, I was kind of just, processing a lot of it, it's interesting because, again, we talk about trauma response, or even again, intergenerational trauma, where it's just, things are just, how we're impacted by that, and then there's generations of families that really don't even leave the reservation, and then they, and so there's a different life in general. And then you put them into this other world where you're talking about clinical, you're talking about doctors and people that want to mess with your mind. And it's a frightening thing already, because you're already kind of taught not to trust, in communities, a lot of communities. And then we expect them to right away, well, this is the only thing that's going to help you. And it can be, it's almost like you said, it's almost like we've, as in us too, as Indian people, we do the same thing. We do, oh, well, I'm a doctor, trust me. You know what I mean? And and then we kind of perpetuate the trauma more, even though we obviously have their best interests in mind and heart. But again, for somebody that doesn't really understand it or know, there's a fear. And so, so that is the good thing about, like, again, having community, or like even like you said, having agencies, or even no matter where you work at, whether it's tribal or non-tribal or whatever, that you have the nicest person at the front desk.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because if you're not nice, oh my, it's gonna. There it is.
Not going to go well.
Right.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
no excuse, and we know how that goes, because I've experienced it myself. Hey, I thought this was an Indian clinic. Why is this person being mean to me? And then right away that's their excuse, and they take off. And then just again, then I'll never go there again. They're just rude. They don't like Indian people there, even though it's an Indian clinic. Like we or even an agency that wants to maybe of case management, it becomes an issue. So I see all that. I see all that kind of playing out. With kind of just back in what you were saying, Art.
Yeah. So as we move to the next slide, one thing to remember is that we have people. We look at an issue of why do people leave assistance or help or counseling or any number of things. Why do they not follow through on medical care? Oftentimes what we find is that the person is responsive, they're responsive in one of three ways. They're either going to take flight, so I'm not going back there anymore, or they're going to freeze, which means basically they're not going to really engage. They don't feel safe enough to engage, however that might look. Or they're going to get aggressive or resistant, and kind of take a response of why are you telling me what to do? And so those responses should be looked at as cries for help and need for safety, as well as a bunch of other things like trust. And so that has to be established. And oftentimes we think that we don't have, and this is kind of what's behind what we oftentimes call reluctance to engage and early dropouts from services and so forth. Oftentimes I'll hear from therapists particularly say, well, I don't have issues with this person. They come in with this attitude or whatever it might be, chip on their shoulder. Those are all trauma responses. And I'll often ask them, do you ever recall knowing that you're going to be seeing a certain client on a certain day, and maybe you see in your little thing that they have checked in, or maybe you see them out the window, they're coming across the parking lot, see them drive in, a certain family, and you think to yourself like, oh, this isn't going to be a good day. This is, I don't know, I'm not sure why they show up all the time. What it's important to understand is that's your trauma response. You're responding in a way that also is going to elicit their trauma. So not only do they not feel safe, you don't feel safe. So these are issues that we change within ourselves and within our organizations. We begin to change how we engage people in a more naturalistic way. And then, you get this vigilance, this vigilance that is definitely a trauma responsive issue of people who are very on edge when they come in. They're uncomfortable. They may be suspicious. That's not something that's probably seen in most Western ways. So, it's from outside their culture. I'm going to ask Mike or Holly if you have something you want to offer.
I was just going to say, I think what you all are talking about, when you said soul wound, number one, tells you how deep trauma is in some Native people. But the other thing is the difference between a mainstream facility of offering help where they assume safety. They assume that people are there because they have all these assumptions that with the Native person, if they don't feel safe, as you said, it's really difficult, if not impossible, for them to engage. And that the first step is to establish safety. That's like our friend Etheline Ironcloud, 2 dogs up in the Dakotas, used to say, when people come into their facility, the first thing they do not give them a form to fill out. They don't do any of that. First thing they do is they provide comfort. They get them a cup of coffee, or they do something it's all about that safety, that this is a safe environment. We understand you here. So thank you for sharing that. Mike, did you have any other thoughts? I know we need to kind of clip along here because of time, but.
Yeah, we can go forward. We can.
So we've been talking about this already, about what influences the decision of Native men to decline or delay seeking assistance. And Mike, you really spoke to this well when you were talking earlier. And I think we've kind of covered this, but is there any other thought that you wanted to add to that, Mike?
Just I think one of the things is that I think we're all getting used to this. I mean, I know that even doing trainings, I train a lot for NAFA as well, which is Native American Fathers and Families Association. I mean, even doing trainings. I remember when I first started 12 years ago doing trainings for NAFA, that there is hardly any men in those trainings. You know, and more recently, in the last probably 3 to 5 years, somewhere around there, you know, there's more of an increased number of men becoming trainers, or, you know, wanting to seek help. There's not a lot of programming for men. And so there's not a lot of training around it. You know what I mean? We're very limited in, and so without the training, without people really truly understanding that, and having men in the field working with men, Native men working with Native men, and there's always going to be the struggle, because it's really hard to identify with somebody that either doesn't look like you or speak the same kind of, you know, whatever language, you know what I mean, whatever that language is, you know, and so to make men feel comfortable. And then there's also the ego. Native men got egos, you know what I mean, and sometimes we feel like we could do it on our own, but just understand that we all need support. We all need support in somehow, some way. And there's a lot of different ways to get that assistance from somewhere.
And the other thing that's that I really admire, Mike, about you and Native Dads Network and all of the folks involved in it, is that it's a Native male designed movement. It's not really a program, it's like a movement for Native men. And if you think about it, most decision makers in helping services tend to be women. So they're developing support and services for men, but they can't really think like a man. I mean, so what you all are doing, a male perspective on the movement that you've developed, is really important. Native men for Native men is like unbelievably important. So I'm wondering, since we're getting close to running out of time, if we can just skip ahead to the Native female perspective. Just skip that one. Skip that one. And go past our beautiful banner. So let me just, if you don't mind, Art and Mike, let me just go ahead and add this about the Native female perspective. And thank you for sharing this incredible photograph, which is from the wellness conference that Native Dads Network had this last week or 2 weeks ago, recently.
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. That's amazing. So the next slide I wanted to share with you all is just some perspective from a Native woman's perspective on both help delaying or help declining, no thank you, I don't need this, to help seeking motivation. So, and some of these are very similar, I think, for men, but shame and fear, stigma, definitely a fear of your children being removed. I don't know if it's depth of addiction, it's more maybe denial of the addiction. Past being involved in an abusive relationship and being belittled for a long period of time, feeling that you're not really worthy. Sometimes just a feeling that I'm kind of trapped in my life. I can't, nothing, there's no hope and nothing's going to change. On the flip side, the motivating factors is children, again, come out on both sides, really want to have a better life for your children. And being around someone, feeling safe, as you're saying, Art, that you feel safe enough to feel that somebody really appreciates you, cares about your future, and you can get a resurgence of your self-worth. Financial assistance always is a big help. And then the whole brilliance concept, I do believe every Native person is brilliant. And when they first come into your therapy room, or always when you're describing that dance, that happens between the therapist and the person seeking help. Part of that, I think, is an undercurrent of brilliance, that the so-called patient is actually very brilliant, and they're observant, they're watching, they're waiting, they're trying to see if they're testing the environment. The other thing I wanted to add, in addition to this slide, I did do a little informal survey and asked 10 other Native women these two questions, and their answers were very much the same. fear of losing children on the left. In an abusive relationship, they're not allowed to leave their abuser, so they couldn't go to treatment. And one was they don't want to stop. That the addiction is comforting, so they don't have a motivation necessarily to stop. And then the fear of unknown, you have to go to treatment or whatever. What does that mean? I don't know what I don't know what's gonna happen. But on the other side, it was similar, very similar responses. Court ordered was one, of course. The other one was housing security. One of the responses was housing security. That, we have to think about all the other life pieces, not just substance use treatment, not just mental health support, not just, but housing is critical. And then, of course, wanting to go back to their cultural roots and finding someone who believes in them, just as Art was talking about. So I wanted to share that with you all now. So any other last kind of comments from Art and Mike before we?
Well, I would just add that these are very important, these areas. And if most, let me say, many therapists might look at the help delay and help declining list and say, well, you don't have to look hard at the list to say, well, the person's being defensive. Mm-hmm. Of course, they're being defensive. They mm-hmm. feel at risk. They feel mm-hmm. like they can only be harmed in this situation. And so we have to get past that. And that may take some time. Mm-hmm. On the motivating side, these are small victories will go far. So, we oftentimes I will help people to see that the type of life they were meant to have, as a family, and they could have, and work toward those motivating factors rather than the resistance that might be there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mike?
I'm just listening. I was kind of just in my thoughts too. I think one of the things, and I look at this too. I mean, of Native women and the Native men. Sometimes we, and I like I said, when I do groups, sometimes it's the men and the women because they'll bring their wives or things of that nature. And some people go, well, how do you teach women like you're a man, that kind of thing, and because like healthy is universal. Of course, if I was a woman, I could speak, more in depth in certain areas, but healing, love, forgiveness is universal, and when we, and so when we get to that place and we understand, like, this is a very, maybe off a little bit what you guys are talking about, but, about healing our spirit. I know what my spirit feels like when it's broken. How do we heal our spirit? And it goes into our beliefs and traditionally and how our spirit returns home. And so, really identifying what that is and looking at that and so on. And so what are you feeding yourself spiritually and get to that good place? You know what I mean? And that, mm-hmm. And each person be able to do that on their own, but it's just very powerful when I start to look at, both when we start to focus on genders, but we said that it could help, when we focus on that, we could help everyone at the same time. We're all on this journey together.
Mm-hmm. I really like the last comment that's in the chat about helping our people see the life they are meant to have. It seems like just that phrase neutralizes things. It feels safe. It feels supportive. It's not an expert, talking down to you, but just helping our people see the life they are meant to have. I think that's wonderful. So what we normally do now is, I think the next slide might be Livia. Can you go to the next one? There. We normally have Livia kind of peruse the chat and have any kind of comments that she might have. We just have not very much time, Livia, but do you have any thoughts you want to share? Livia, who sees herself as a non-native person, as a guest in native space.
Yes, thank you so much. And thanks for the opportunity to be here. And just these two questions, if you have something that really resonated with you around what Mike and I shared that had meaning for you, we'd love to hear it. I see it in the chat box. And we also, is there something specific that you heard that will change how you work with Native people? And I'm seeing some of those comments. I love that one person said, the whole, what you shared around, grandma's voice, you're talking like, what would grandma say really resonated. And the idea about having the friendliest person being the receptionist, we heard that. And I see, Michelle, you're seeing what was meaningful to me as a Native woman clinician is how the use of personal experience is helpful. And so there's just a lot of takeaways we're seeing here, and please keep them coming because they're just so helpful to see, and it's a way for you to really apply part of what you're learning today and sharing with each other. So I appreciate that very much. Maya, I see your question, how can researchers best collaborate with Native tribes? I don't know, Holly, if that's something that you want to talk to specifically in the last minutes.
That's a big question, Maya. And I put my email in the chat. If you send me an email, I'd love to touch base with you about that because it's kind of a long conversation and there's protocol to that, very strict protocol. But I'd be happy to chat to you offline about that, Maya. So please do that. But we're just getting ready to close up now. And normally we end with, after a couple of summary comments, we end with another video. But today, Mike is going to bless us with the song instead. I just wanted to say that I think the two takeaways for me in this whole conversation, Art and Mike, was realizing that people that come to see you for help need comfort. They need to feel safe. And then the second thing is, Mike, put your friendliest person at that front desk or answering that phone or whatever. Put the most friendliest person, most welcoming person there. So to me, those are really, they seem like simple tips, but they're incredibly important. And we also listed some resources here in Native Dads Network and Center for Native Child and Family Resilience Arts Organization. The new Tribal Echo that our friends at Portland Area Indian Health Board are doing, Journey to Health, which they just started. Tribal Law and Policy Institute, which is the umbrella organization for the Center for Native Child and Family Resilience. And of course, the link to our ongoing series that we have every month. There might be one more slide that just says what's going to happen next month. Can you just skip one more and then we'll go back? Oh, okay. I don't know if we want to go on that. Let's go back to Mike. Can you back up one?
Hey, I don't want to look at me singing.
Okay, well, all right. Well, we'll go to, how about the next month's slide?
There you go. Yeah,
slides up.
That way people could look at that.
There. Okay, go on.
Yeah,
all right, thank you.
I appreciate it. I know it was all good. No, I just want to share the song. Again, it's a healing song for wellness. It was dreamt by one of our dreamers here. It's a new song, so it's been around for probably like the last 5-6 years. But just wanted to share it with everyone. Put yourself in a good place. And the self-care is so important when you do this work. And I know that we all pick up things that when we go and we work with trauma and the pain that people carry, and including our own. And so we always got to take care of ourselves. And something I'm reminded of all the time because I hang around people like Dr. Art and other individuals that I pay attention and I listen to them, and take care of myself, first, so that way I could do this work. So important.
Oh,
Oh, you're on mute.